Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Continuing our unit on geography of the United States, and today we're going to look at where people live in our country. So we're going to look at our population, how many people we have, and where that population is distributed throughout the United States. So the first thing, the world's population is about 7.5 billion people. So that's a very large population. The United States has, out of that 7.5 billion people, 330 million of them. In fact, we're one of the bigger countries in terms of population in the whole world. We rank number 3 in the world for people. So we're the third most populated country in the world. So what's the first and second most populated countries in the world? Well, the first one is China. China has about 1.4 billion people than us. That's more than 1 billion more people than we have in the United States. The second is India, and it has just under 1.4 billion people. So China and India's populations are super huge compared to the other countries in the world. So if you added these two up, you would see that China and India together account for 1/3 of the world's population, meaning that 1 out of every 3 people living on this earth live in either China or India. That's how large those countries' populations are. Now back to the United States. We have 50 states, and the populations of the 50 states vary tremendously. The highest populated state in our country is California. California has around 39 million people, and that's a lot for a state. I'm going to give you a comparison. The whole country of Canada is the second biggest country in the world. The whole country of Canada has less people than just the state of California. Now, the state in the United States that has the lowest population is Wyoming. Wyoming only has about 550,000 people. A lot of our major cities have more people than the whole state of Wyoming. So let's talk urban versus rural populations, because these are two vocabulary terms that address population. So if we're talking about urban versus rural, an urban population, those are our city areas. Or those are our areas that have a higher population density. Population density is that average number of people per square mile. So there's more people on average living there than in other places. Then we have rural. Rural areas are our country areas. Now the United States is made up of more country area than city area, but those areas have lower population densities, meaning that the population in a square mile is less than it is in the urban areas. So my next question is, does the United States have more people living in rural areas or urban areas? Most of the country is a rural area. However, 80% of the United States' population lives in what we consider urban areas. So even though there's more rural area of the country, that just means there's less people living in those rural areas. So if we look at a population density map of the United States, we can start to see where those urban areas are versus those rural areas. The darker the red, the higher the population density. And you can tell where major cities are located just because of how red it is. If we look at the northeast part of our country, I'm going to even start with Pennsylvania, right in here. You see dark red in the southeast corner of Pennsylvania. And that makes sense. The city of Philadelphia, one of the biggest cities in our country, is located there. Same thing around here. New York City, Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan. You go to the western coast, you can see where Seattle is. You can see where San Francisco is, Los Angeles is, El Paso, Texas, Austin and Dallas, Texas. So you are able to easily see where these city areas or urban areas are with the population density map. You also are able to see where rural areas are. If you look here, if it's a white area or even a light pink area, it's an area with a low population density, meaning that not a lot of people are living in those areas. You can see this whole area of the country is very lowly populated. Outside of a few cities like Denver, Colorado, Colorado Springs, Salt Lake City, Utah, the majority of that land area has a very low population density. So when we're looking, we can see that, oh, the state of Wyoming, that's why it has only 550,000 people. It's a lowly populated area. And there's geographic reasons for that. Number one, it's a landlocked state. Number two, it has mountainous area. Number three, you have a large area for farming that they're utilizing from the plains as well. But it's a big state with not a lot of people. So let's even look at our county. So this map is broken down into all the counties in the United States. We live in Bedford County in Pennsylvania. So that's going to be this one right here. I'm hoping that I don't touch my map to make it move, but right here. And we can see that Bedford County, we can see that Bedford County right here is very light pink. So we're at the lower end of population density, which means Bedford County is a very rural area. And that makes sense. As we drive through, we don't see big, tall skyscraper buildings. We don't see huge housing developments. But what we do see in our area is we see those farms for agriculture. We see areas where they are producing lumber and timber. So we have, in our area, we have these items that help us to make livings through farming or forestry. So my next map I find interesting. The next map breaks the United States down into where half of the population lives versus where the other half of the population lives. And so the red areas account for half of the United States' population, and the gray, blue areas count for the other half. And so what it's really showing is we have a big country in the United States, but a lot of our population is living in just smaller areas. So you can see these are the major city areas of our country that are red. And then the other areas are less populated areas as well. All right, so let's take a look at some of these major cities in the United States. The biggest city in the United States is New York City. New York City has over 8.5 million people just living within the city. If New York City was its own state, it would rank 12th in the United States for population, meaning that 38 states have less people than just that one city of New York City. The second biggest city is Los Angeles, 4 million people. And then the third biggest city is Chicago, 2.6 million people. And then from there you have other large cities such as Houston, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Arizona. So on a map, you can see where some of our major cities are. As I said earlier, I'm going to point out some of them. Boston, it's in Massachusetts. Here's where New York City is. In Pennsylvania, we have both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. There's Baltimore and Washington, D.C. close by. Miami, Florida. Atlanta, Georgia. Detroit, Michigan. Chicago, Illinois, third biggest city, located here, right along Lake Michigan. Then you have Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, because Texas has a lot of people in. And then in California, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego. Those are some of the bigger ones in California as well. Other big cities you've probably heard of: Las Vegas, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona, Seattle, Washington. So just pointing out some of our major cities in the United States. So at this point, that takes us to the end of this lesson on population. We got to see where people live throughout the United States and how our population is distributed. So at this point, go back into Google Classroom, check out the rest of today's assignment, make sure you finish everything, and we'll see you next time.